Hey, how's it going? Chris here. This is the Learn to Code podcast here at 1 month. And I have a question for you, a little pop quiz. What do all of these companies have in common? LARC, General Assembly, Product Hunt, Gimlet Media? Well, these are all places that Nathan Baschez has either worked at as an early employee or helped create. He's one of the most prolific dudes that I know. He's just kind of seems like he's everywhere at the right time, and it's pretty amazing to watch. I first met Nathan back in 2012. I remember we were at General Assembly and we were standing in the kitchen and he was speaking with Brad Hargraves, who was one of the co-founders of General Assembly. And he was telling him, Nathan was saying this project that he had made about an in-browser text editor so you could learn to code right in the browser, which was pretty new at the time. Codecademy had kind of just come out and was, starting to get followers, but there wasn't really anyone else that was doing that. And what Nathan really designed and developed was this product that became Dash, which at the time, right around that time, was pretty huge. It was just such a simple way to just make your first website. And that was more or less what it was used for, just like a place that you can come and just really clearly just make like a hello, like an about screen website. And it was pretty sweet. Nathan, that was Dash, and that was acquired by GA that year. And since then, Nathan has gone on to work at, I don't know, what are, in my opinion, just some of the really coolest places to be working at these days. He helped co-create Product Hunt with Ryan Hoover, and then left when the company went to Y Combinator and started to really grow, because he then launched a new startup called HardBound, which was kind of like a visual way of reading books. I don't know if you'd seen it at the time, but it was just like a fun way to kind of easily digest books, books that he loved and books that the community loved. And then he went on to Gimlet Media, which is the podcasting network that's behind just some really awesome podcasts. Some of my favorites, like Reply All and the Startup Podcast. Those are some really good ones. And in case you didn't hear, this was really big news this year. Gimlet Media was acquired by Spotify for $230 million, which is really unprecedented in podcasting world. Still, that's a whole nother show probably about what's going to happen to the future of podcasting. But yeah, he was there kind of at the forefront of all that happening. And then he went to Substack, which is his latest company, which he is just now leaving and starting something new. So we really have this just so much it's really just one of the most prolific people that I know as far as just kind of being at the right place at the right time and working on some really interesting products. So I'm excited to chat with Nathan today. We are going to chat about, guidelines for choosing what to work on, as well as behind the scenes of creating General Assembly's Dash, as well as Product Hunt and HardBound, as well as what it's like to work at Gimlet Media. What's it like working at a media company versus a startup? What's the difference there? And some tips on staying focused when learning to code. So really all of that is just packed into this episode. There's so much, and it's a really fun chat. So I hope you stick around. And just one more last thing. When I met Nathan, his last name was Baschez, so he was Nathan Baschez, but congratulations, he recently got married. And so he actually changed his name and merged it with his wife's name. And so now he's Nathan Baschez. So if you know him as Nathan Baschez, and now you're like, who is this Nathan Baschez character? That's exactly what's going on. So you can shout out and give him congrats. So yeah, here we go. This is my conversation with Nathan Baschez. Nathan, hey, welcome to the show.
How's it going? Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you on the show. I want to start off with the question that I usually start off asking. Nathan, how did you learn to code?
That is a good question. So I was in college. I went to school at Michigan State University. And when I went to school, it was originally going in thinking I would do something like be a philosophy professor maybe, or maybe a lawyer or something, like constitutional law, something cool like that. And I had no clue what that meant, but when I learned a little bit more about what it entailed, I realized it would be challenging because law school requires a lot of difficult and somewhat boring stuff, and I have a low tolerance for somewhat boring stuff. Being a professor is a very hard gig. It's especially in the humanities, it's just really, really hard. And so I somehow stumbled upon Paul Graham's essays about starting companies and being a programmer. And I was like, this is really cool because you get to create your own thing that's extremely non-boring, maybe people want to use it and you could make money doing it. So that's like, if it works, obviously, like better hopefully than being a professor, which is like really hard. You have to like really want to do it and love your subject matter. And I knew I didn't have it for like philosophy. I thought it'd be kind of a cool thing to do, I guess. And so I instantly was like, this is it. I want to build companies and I want to build them on the internet using software. And, but the problem was I obviously did not know how to do that at all. And so at first I would describe myself as more of like an ideas guy. And I quickly learned that was very hard to do because you're essentially coming up with concepts of things that you have no clue if they'll work or not. And you have very little, if not zero ability to make them happen. And so I pretty quickly learned like I need to have something I can kind of contribute if I'm going to find teammates. And it's even better if I can like create some momentum on my own and then like show people that it's kind of working and see if that works. And so basically from there, it was a pretty quick path to like, buying a book called Headfirst HTML, CSS, and I also got Headfirst PHP and MySQL. And I just kind of like went through those books and like learned a bunch of stuff on the internet. I remember, I think at the time Treehouse was like brand new. It wasn't even called Treehouse then. It used to be called something else. You remember this? It was like,
yeah,
I don't remember what it was called.
I used to use it back in the day. I don't know what it was. Yeah, I know what you mean. It did have a different name.
It was before they changed it and before it was particularly big. It was just like some blog, I think, started like a video series.
It was Ryan Carson. Yeah. It was Carsonified. It was this thing. It was like a side project. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I don't know, it was like when that first started. This was like 2010, 11, something in there. Anyway, and I just was like kind of diving in. And, I went to like a startup weekend. These were huge at the time. My friend Eric Jorgensen organized it at Michigan State, and I like competed in it and met some people there who could like write code better than me. And I was kind of like plodding along, doing my best. And we built a thing that was pretty cool. It was basically like if you have a thought or like you want to save something that's like not like a to-do or a reminder or like writing down someone's like phone number or something that you're supposed to remember, but like something more like creative or something that's just like the kind of thing you want to keep more of in your life and to remember. You basically pull out this app, you write down whatever the thought is or the quote or whatever, and then we show you a random one from the past as kind of like a reward. And so it was a cool little weird loop of like programming your brain with different stuff and saving stuff and seeing stuff in a way that was kind of novel and interesting. And so we built that, and then I was just kind of off to the races of like, I like building things. People actually used it. I could see like I can write code and people will do something with it, and it's fun. Yeah.
So was that the first app that you built?
Pretty much. I mean, I remember I did some like HTML and CSS for MySpace before that. So it depends on if you want to say like app, like definitely that was the first iOS app. And honestly, even the iOS app, like I didn't have anything to do with. I helped with like the front end of the website basically. So I had the least programmery type job of the whole thing. But yeah, I think that was the first like I would call it like first product type thing that I built. I had definitely like sort of brainstormed stuff before that, and done some like HTML, CSS fake interfaces of things, but I had never like had a thing with a database that really worked before that.
So you said you used the Headspace series to learn those
Headfirst.
Headfirst, that's what it's called. Headspace is something else.
Yeah.
And what other?
I meditated the app into existence.
Yeah. Yum. And what other resources were you using? I mean, was it just that book series, and was it just having? It sounds like the hackathon. It was like hackathon, right? That you went to. Was this kind of influential as well?
Yeah, I mean, I would think of it as like there's the phase where I'm sort of getting oriented and I have a specific idea, but I really have no clue where to start. And so I need someone to sort of like guide me. And the Headfirst series from O'Reilly is like amazing for that, where it's kind of like, it's just a very beginner friendly, I would say, like series of books. And I don't even know if they're still like up to date or whatever, like if they have like Headfirst like Node or Rails or something, but like Headfirst PHP and MySQL was awesome in terms of just understanding the very basics of like, you have files on your computer, you run a version of a server on your computer that then you go to in your browser, and you can like load the file and then like submit stuff to a server, and the server can do something with it, put something in a database, get something out of a database, return a new HTML file that's like dynamically generated. That kind of really basic stuff. I just, I had no clue about what are HTTP requests, like that kind of stuff. And then once I got a little bit more oriented, I started like branching off on the side and trying to build my own things using the stuff I had learned so far from this book. And then when I would get stuck, I would either like look in the book or Google something to see if I could figure it out. And then I also did a little bit of the video series. Videos never, for whatever reason, like worked as well for me. I always preferred to like have something that was a little bit more like self-paced, and also I like to like listen to music when I was doing stuff. I remember having that book and just feeling like so cool. Like there were these people in Ann Arbor that I had met at the Ann Arbor New Tech meetup. Is like the startup meetup of Ann Arbor, Michigan. And I would like drive down there, and I got to know some of those people, and they were all like really good programmer, like computer science type people that I didn't have a lot of exposure to people like that. And I just remember this feeling of like how cool it was to be able to like write code and stuff. And the O'Reilly book was like a part of it for me, because I noticed that those are things that like real programming, and of course they had the like Unix guide or whatever, something pretty different than the Head First series, but like whatever, it was awesome.
Yeah, those Head First books are awesome. I've used them as well because they have lots of illustrations and just like kind of funner, like more fun examples. Yeah. I also like how I want to focus in on how you said that like videos didn't necessarily work for you, and I find that in myself as well, because for me, like I actually have a really hard time sitting in class, and videos are okay. Yep. But I tend to really like books as well. But I know, because I teach this, I know a lot of people in my class feel the exact opposite way. So I think when you're starting to learn to code, it's interesting because I guess you kind of have to find the right medium that works for you, whether it's in the classroom, whether it's on your own time or scheduled time. I think everybody has like a different way of learning. Yeah,
definitely for me, it was like very motivating to have specific ideas that I wanted to build. And I could kind of get over this initial hump of like, getting oriented or whatever with like the tutorial book type approach, where you're building something that they want you to build rather than your thing. But like, as soon as I'm like, okay, I can see basically from, they taught me how to build this thing, I can take what I learned and use it to build this other thing. And then any gaps in my knowledge, I can just Google. That's the best feeling ever. When you're like building a thing and you basically know that you're at the point where you know how to Google stuff and you can build the thing and you'll get some specific answer to a specific question. That's really helpful. I honestly, though, I wouldn't have, so those just Googling for specific questions or problems and reading tutorial books were probably like half of how I learned. The other half was just like really smart programmers that I was either friends with or worked for, basically. So like after college, I got a job at a startup called LARC, moved out to Palo Alto. Right. And, that was the first time I really was like full time to some degree writing code. I was not like, I was more of a designer there, but I was on the code base and like working with engineers, and they were very patient with me and like very helpful in terms of like, kind of my learning process, I guess. And so like, because it's even better if you have like a specific thing that you're running up against, and you're like, you Google it, and your Google is too much of a high level thing for Google to really know like what to do with it. Much better when you have a person that can say, you're asking for this, but that's not actually what you want. Your mistaken idea is like this thing is the same as this, but actually it's a totally different thing that you need to understand, and you should Google about database indexes or whatever, because that's the reason why your query is slow, or whatever specific thing you're running into. Yeah,
so having some feedback, even if it's just someone looking over your shoulder every now and then to guide you, is it doesn't have to be a class or like step-by-step videos, but sometimes it's just like having someone to go, hey, you're just going the wrong way.
Totally. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I want to talk about now so you were in college, and then you, at some point you were working at LARC, and then at some point you made Dash. You've worked on so many things. What did you graduate in college with, and then how did you get from there to building Dash?
I graduated with a degree in political theory, basically political philosophy. And it was a lot of fun, but, not very directly applicable, I would say, to building software. Although, the more that time goes on, the more it does feel like it's maybe applicable, because it's about, like, what is the good life? How should we structure society? And technology has a lot to do with that. So it's I think good to be thoughtful about that. But anyway, I digress. I got the job at LARC basically because I was very enthusiastic, and it was unclear exactly what I would do, but I was a good enough designer based on some stuff I had previously designed for my own projects that I was building, that they were like, okay, we could hire him as a designer. He's not like the best designer, but he's probably a good enough designer, and we can sort of like figure out the rest from here, and either it'll work or it won't. But it was like an internship basically. So I wasn't like getting paid very much at all or anything. So it was a great sort of just like, hey, we'll give you a chance kind of experience,
Did you apply via their site or via a job board? How did you get connected?
Oh, so when I was in college, I started a meetup called Hackers and Hustlers, which was like sort of they had good meetups for like people interested in technology in Ann Arbor, but not in East Lansing at Michigan State. And so basically, one of the first speakers we got, I don't remember who, but someone that was like more kind of experienced in the tech world of Michigan introduced me to this guy, Zach Steindler, who he's one of the co-founders of LARC and lived in Ann Arbor. They were kind of like a remote company before it was cool to be remote, really. And so this is like before Slack and everything else. Basically, Zach spoke at this meetup. And then after the meetup, he's like, hey, what are you doing after graduation? And I was like, oh, I don't know. I think at the time I was like, oh, I'm like starting this company or whatever, which was like a bad idea, and it was totally destined to fail. That I ended up never starting it though, because he was like, well, you could like maybe come intern for LARC. And so I did that and moved out to Palo Alto, and it was like an amazing decision to do that. But anyway, so then when I was at LARC, I was there for like a year and a half, almost 2 years, and I just kind of realized like I really wanted to work on something that was more consumer facing. So they built a tool for websites to put in like a chat box in the corner where you can ask someone live why does this thing cost more or whatever. Anyway, that was nice. Like it was cool to build a thing that makes it easier for people using websites to like figure out their answers to their questions, and to help people who run these websites like get more sales in a lot of cases, or like help with customer support. But like, I just really wanted to work on something in like people using the internet to make themselves smarter. Like I always loved books and reading articles and stuff like that. And to me, the promise of the internet is like at its core related to that. I mean, there's lots of like really nice things that it makes about the world like more efficient or whatever. But like I always kind of like thinking of the computer as like this supercharged amazing book that's like you can learn anything and like form relationships or whatever, or like debate ideas, and it all can be in formats that like have nothing to do with paper. But a lot of the content we consume is like so much like just digital copies of paper basically still, or digital copies of TV basically, or digital copies of radio, and computers are obviously totally different things though. So I was basically like, what can I create that would like use the computer in a better way? And so basically as a side project, I started working on this thing to teach people how to code, where it's like, I was thinking of the Head First books, and I was like, but what if instead of a book, it was like interactive and on a web page, and you could like write the code and it would tell you if you did a good job or not, And so I actually left LARC basically an ill-fated startup attempt to like do this, and I was thinking of like maybe I would do some sort of discussion forum thing or like whatever. I wasn't sure what it would be, but that's kind of how I ended up working on Dash, which is this project to teach people how to code.
Yeah, Dash, when I saw it in, I want to say 2012 was when it came out. I was working at General Assembly, and I remember the day we met. We were in the kitchen, and Brad Hargraves introduced us.
Yeah.
And I remember he showed it to me, and I had never seen anything like that before, where you could code in HTML in the browser and then see the images appear in real time. And I think it was like this kind of instant gratification feedback loop for people who are learning to code, especially because when you're learning to code, often installing the software can be this kind of barrier to entry. People, maybe they don't have access to their computer, their work computer, they can't install it, or they, trip something up. And so you didn't have to do anything. I mean, I guess it's kind of like how Codecademy is and was around the time, but there was something like, I think, more visual and project based about Dash that people got excited about.
Yeah, Codecademy was like an array is a list of things. Here, create a new like a function. You put in an input and you'll return an output. And you could like it was like the command line, right? It's like basically what it was based off of.
I feel it.
Yeah. And that's not to say it's bad. It's just I think it kind of starts in the wrong place for most people. Because I think a lot of people want something that like they can understand quickly. And if I'm like, here's how to make a web page, like you're used to looking at web pages, now let's like make one. Using the actual code that it takes to make one. It's like HTML is like, and CSS are like just a lot simpler and more visual to like understand. And then as you start getting a little bit better at that, we sprinkle in JavaScript where you can make pretty advanced stuff with like games and things, or we made like a CSS robot to like really get into like how do these things work. So I think you can get pretty advanced pretty fast, but it has to start from this point of like, I feel like I'm looking at something that I've seen before on the internet, and if you start with like, here's a function, here's what it does, it feels like you're giving me a bunch of sort of dictionary definitions that aren't super motivated or motivating. Like it feels like you're getting somewhere, you know? Like the phrase I always put it was like, where's the sort of light at the end of the tunnel? Like if you're telling people things and they're kind of saying like, so what? Then it's not emotionally connecting. Whereas if you're telling people things and they type and they're like, whoa, then that's like, they feel like they're getting closer to like what they want. And so that was kind of what we optimized for.
That's really cool. And I mean, I guess that's part of that vision that you have of the web as being this kind of like visual book that you were saying, where there's like you can communicate and invoke emotion through the products that you're creating. Yeah.
And also like, I felt like it would kind of help to have some really low level like narrative to put you through it. So we put you as in like, you're building something for a friend. Like a friend wants you to make this thing for them. And so like, would you do it? And we'll like we'll help you do it or whatever. So it's a little like, we didn't want to be overly like gamified or story driven or whatever, but there was like a little bit of that in it. And I think it helps to kind of like put some conceptual like wrapper around it. But it's funny because, you know, I actually was able to get in touch with Kathy Sierra, and she gave me a lot of amazing advice. And she's the one who made the Head First series that I actually used to learn how to code those books. And so it was a pretty cool thing to like get the chance to email back and forth with her. I think we got on the phone once or twice. But yeah, I don't want to overstate like how involved she was, but it was pretty cool to like kind of take it full circle of I learned using things that she made, and then now I'm teaching other people using ideas from her experience.
Was this back in the day, or was this kind of more recently?
No, that was like when I was building Dash.
Oh, when you were building Dash. Yeah, for sure.
So back in like 2012, yeah.
That's amazing. And so one of the things that I really wanted to talk to you about today is this, that you've worked on so many different projects. You know, I forgot that you had worked at LARC as well.
Yeah.
So, I mean, which is also a super cool product. I think I don't use it as much these days, but back in the day we used it. But regardless to say, I mean, LARC, building Dash, which got acquired by General Assembly. Is that true? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then what else? Then Product Hunt, and just a list of things. How do you choose what you're going to work on?
That's a really good question. It's some combo of like, is the timing right? So like there's lots of things that I may want to work on, but that I'm too focused on something else. So like, you know, for the past year, I've been 100% Substack ever since I joined, and I really haven't had time for pretty much anything else, including even like writing or something like that, like a one-off blog post or something. I tried to do that some to like dog food our own product, because Substack basically helps writers create paid email newsletters. And we also, you can use it without charging, so it just works kind of like Tiny Letter basically, but like more modern and full featured. And you know, it's funny, I've been totally focused on Substack. And so part of the filter is just like, okay, when do I have time? And then, okay, so if I have time and I'm looking for something new because I either like left a job, or I'm thinking about leaving a job and I'm kind of creating space to figure out what's next. Or like, you know, same thing when I was at HardBound. That was the company I founded after I worked at General Assembly. It's like I just was focused on that the whole time. But at a certain point, we ran out of cash. The company did not work out, and I had to figure out kind of what was next. So there's very limited windows where it's like I'm like a taxi and my light's on, you know?
Yeah.
And so first of all, my light has to be on. And then when my light's on, how do I decide what to work on next? I mean, first is like just sort of the practical, like, what financially do I need right now, right? Because like, am I in a spot where I feel comfortable like taking more risk and like owning more of it, but getting compensated less upfront? So like starting a company, or maybe like trying to stay kind of independent, building some like freelancey type thing where the money is a little bit more risky, or do I need to like earn some money and like I'm just looking for a full-time job? So like after HardBound, I was like completely broke and emotionally pretty tired because I'd been running this thing for a couple of years and it didn't end up working out. And so I was definitely like, I need to get a full-time job because I don't want to manage like multiple freelance type clients. And I need to start like recouping some of the money that I lost while I was working on HardBound. Now I just recently left Substack, and it's been, I've had a pretty good job for like a couple years. I'm the kind of person that I always want my fingerprint to really be on what I create and to be able to create things that like are valuable, and I want to have like a lot of autonomy and kind of ownership over it. So like I'm open to different things right now, but I'm a little bit more willing to take more financial risk to like build something that I have more ownership over. So that's sort of a core criteria. And then the other thing is just I've tended to gravitate towards things that aspire to make people smarter. So whether it's education or media, it's like somewhere in those two. But I mean, if you draw the through line from like, once I kind of figure that out from my experience at LARC, I built Dash, which helps people learn how to code, Product Hunt, which I ended up not joining full time. It was just kind of like a side project with Ryan. But the thing that I loved about it is it helps people kind of figure out what's out there and take inspiration from like other cool things that other people are making and talk about what is interesting about it or what could be improved about it, etc. Then after Product Hunt, HardBound, which is basically like Dash, except instead of just about learning how to code, it was the visual. Dash had the kind of a visual slideshow format to teach you how to code, in addition to the like you can just write stuff and see it instantly. And so it was like, what if we just like did almost this slideshow type format for lots of different types of content, and it can maybe be this like big platform where media companies use it or individuals can create stuff on it, kind of like podcasts, but like this visual thing that you consume while you're looking at your phone, but like a new medium of content that's like kind of high value.
For books specifically, right? It was like a book.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. For books. Yeah, like a new visual book type thing. Although it ended up evolving away from that because books are like, have the expectation of being really long. And so these were more like shorter, basically. But then, after HardBound, worked at Gimlet Media for a short while where, the podcasts that they create are all about increasing empathy and increasing knowledge of the world. I ended up only staying there kind of short period of time because they ended up deciding not to do any software stuff that I was going to do. And they ended up getting acquired by Spotify. So they just kind of wanted to totally focus on the content piece of it and let other companies handle all the technology. But that was really interesting. And then, most recently Substack, it's like helping writers build these independent businesses where instead of selling their creations, to someone else, like a book publisher or to a like newspaper type company, they could run their own business and monetize their own audience directly. And, if you have 1,000 people paying you $100 a year, you're making $100,000 a year. And these businesses are, tough to get off the ground. But once you get it to the point where it's paying your bills, it's like really sustainable and defensible. And it just can keep growing in a way that a salary does not grow. And so it's great. I mean, it's kind of a utopian vision of like, what if thinkers and writers like were able to make lots of money? So we've seen empirically a lot of them do that. Like the top writer on Substack is making a really, really healthy living, and a lot of other people are too. So
he or she's making a living writing a newsletter, just monetizing it via Substack is what you're saying.
Exactly.
That's nice.
Exactly. Yeah, I don't know what publicly disclosed stats are the most recent, but if you just look up like Substack, like how much do people make or whatever, I think there's press about it, and
cool.
It's a pretty great model. So anyway, I'm just kind of broadly interested in that, and so I pick stuff that helps with that.
Yeah, it sounds like you jump from one thing to the next, and it sounds really exciting. Does it? And it sounds like the financial aspect of it is part of the equation. So I'm just going to kind of recap what I learned. So the financial timing in your life is really important, is number one. Number two is finding something that aligns with your passion for helping make other people smarter or connecting them, I guess, even just like connecting writers to their audience, this kind of idea.
Yeah, and like using the internet to create a better sort of like system for people developing their interest in their knowledge, basically, is kind of broadly the way that I would put it. And part of that could mean like maybe the format is new, like in the case of HardBound, or maybe like the economic model is new in the case of Substack.
Or even Gimlet is really like challenging the economic model of what podcasts could be, you know?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's the further along I've gotten in my career, the more interested I've gotten in the business model side of things and like the company strategy side of things, where it's not just like, what product are we creating? Like, what problem are we solving? What's like a cool thing for the customer? But like, how do you turn that into a defensible business that can grow? And like, how do you kind of connect the dots between what we do and what's in it for us, and how the product works and gets used in the customer's lives? It's kind of like a symbiotic relationship, obviously. So it's the company side of the equation has gotten more interesting to me as I've grown. But the other thing I want to point out is like, I don't actually like changing things that much. Like I would much rather one of these things work out really well and then I just like stick with it as it becomes really big. I consider it not to be a success that I've worked on a bunch of different things. You know, I have no regrets about the path I've taken, and I think in some ways maybe it is fortunate that I've worked on a bunch of different things, because I think I've learned a bunch of different like working styles. I've learned a lot from working in different like products and markets, different needs or different business models, like advertising and subscriptions versus like selling courses and stuff like that. But definitely the goal is to work on something that just works, and I keep working on it for a while.
Yeah. What was one of the biggest lessons you learned working at Gimlet?
Just how different it is to be a media company than to be a technology company.
What's the difference? What's the difference between a media company and technology company?
A lot is cultural, but also the business is a lot harder. So like, it's a really different mindset when you're creating something that's basically a thing that lots of other people use, and it kind of like other people using the thing, it's just got this unlimited kind of like tool value, you know? Very different to create that than to create something that's fundamentally like consumable, where it's like, imagine if all the work you go into creating like a software product, then the people use it, and then basically there's very little value left in the thing because people have consumed the thing and it's kind of over and done with. That's really hard. So you're on this flywheel of you've always got to create more content. And it's hard to create that content. It's like people simultaneously like want something to be amazing and for all this energy and effort to go into it. I mean, think about how much it costs to create like a book, or think about how much it costs to create like Game of Thrones, right? And think about the fact that you can get Game of Thrones for like, what is it, like $15 a month for
sharing
HBO
someone's HBO password?
Yeah, exactly. Like it's insane, right? And like, you know, HBO makes a lot of money off of that, but it's just like, you know, it's really, really hard to make that stuff work, because you could create that whole thing and it could have just not worked out. Like they could have canceled after season 1 and lost millions and millions of dollars if not that many people watched it. And so it's very risky, and it's risky with a different kind of upside than technology companies get. And so it just makes it harder. I think also just culturally, maybe working in a place where most of the employees are like journalists and reporters, everyone is like much more skeptical and pessimistic, I would say, in a way that's like part good, part bad. Like, I mean, I don't know. What do you expect if a company like has an all hands meeting and they're like, we just raised, you know, X million dollars or whatever? At a tech startup, everyone's like high-fiving and stuff. At a company full of journalists, everyone's like, well, what does this mean? Like, how they're very attuned to the downside, perhaps, in a way that's probably good, right? It's probably better. It's probably good to be attuned to that, but it's just very different than what I was used to, which is kind of funny.
What kind of stuff were you working on at Gimlet?
Well, basically the idea was, and I probably shouldn't go into like too much detail, but you know, Gimlet from the beginning has primarily obviously focused on creating podcasts, right? And secondarily focused on creating ads for the podcast. That fuels their ability to make the podcast. But a big problem is that all this great stuff they create, both the content and the ads, goes into apps that they have no control over, that report back very little data, and give them no room to experiment with new forms of content or ads that might make listeners happier.
So you mean like, well, just to contextualize that, so like this podcast, for example, is on Spotify, is on, I don't know, whatever, iTunes, all these places. And the way the podcasting market is right now, from my understanding, and I think what you're saying is it's very hard for podcast makers to know who's listening or like if they're listening. It's just kind of these really vague statistics. This is the problem you're mentioning. Yeah.
Whereas if you were developing an app for this and people were using your app, you would be able to know a lot more about how people are using it and improve it based on that data. And like, sort of, when I say improve it based on the data, I mean it could improve in two ways. One is like just the MP3 file could improve, but two, you can improve the form itself. Like maybe you find that what people really want from this podcast is like these shorter bites where you like people tap on a specific question or whatever, and then you have a collection of stories that are like answering their specific question or whatever. So it's just kind of like, you know, what is there room to create something in addition to, because Gimlet's always going to like, you know, produce the normal podcast thing that goes in normal podcast apps, but like, is there room to create something that does something different and does something that could get people to want to go to a separate app? Not everyone necessarily, but just like combining Gimlet's ability to create world-class audio with an ability to create software in a way that could do something unique. Because really the connection between the people who create the audio and the actual software format is like totally modular. It's basically like you've got an MP3 file and you've got some like metadata, like what is the name of the episode, what is the description, like that's it. Let alone if you want to throw in any pictures or anything like that, no chance, right? So what could you do if you integrated that more to solve for making it more interesting for listeners and to maybe build community or different, like what are the different things we could do? And there's a lot of different ideas of what it could be, and it's something that the company had thought about for a long time, but never done. And they got to a certain stage where they were like, maybe we do this, maybe we do this, maybe we do this. And then I knew Matt Lieber, I know him still obviously, but I had known him pretty well. And when I told him that, you know, I was, you know, having to shut down HardBound because we ran out of money and I was kind of figuring out what's next, he was like, well, maybe you could come to Gimlet and we could figure out what kind of like technology product we may want to do, because we've been thinking about it for a while. And so at first it was just like a consulting thing where I was like, I'll help you think through these ideas. And then it was like, oh, we're actually going to build these ideas. And I actually ended up leaving pretty quickly, more quickly than I wanted to, because they at first thought they were going to do the ideas and then decided not to. And it was just a kind of a question of like company strategy that had a lot to do with, you know, how fast Spotify was growing. So they ended up getting acquired by Spotify, and you know, they ended up sticking with just doing content, which makes total sense. I think it was the best decision for the company. But it was cool to be able to be a part of it and to kind of help them think through, well, what if we did software? And we did some pretty cool stuff. I was there. Like we made an Alexa skill. We redid the website. We did a lot of data stuff. And we came up with a bunch of cool ideas for apps that maybe someday someone will build something with that.
That's awesome. What goes into building an I don't want to say the word because I have one in my room, but
oh right, yeah.
I'll make everyone's go off the Amazon Echo Lady A skill. Yeah.
You know, it's actually pretty easy technology-wise because you basically just have to set up like when someone says this kind of thing, and you give it a bunch of examples of like it should trigger this action when they say stuff like this, then just return this response or whatever. And so it's very pure, like kind of HTTP. You don't even like, you know, playing an audio file or something like that is like you don't really have to have any audio or anything like that. It's all just totally like optional basically. So you can just return some text and like Lady A will just speak the text to you.
Is this do you code? Is this like a file that you're uploading, like a HTML file or like an XML file, or is it just all within Amazon's interface that you can program Lady A to speak?
You know, I think they do have a thing now that's like easier to do that, and I've also seen a startup come out recently that helps you do it where you don't even have to write code. But the way we did it is we actually partnered with a company that makes Alexa's or Lady A skills, and you know, they kind of created a first version of it, and that helped me kind of figure out what it did, and then I kind of took over from there to finish it up because it was mostly done. But I was kind of the one who was like maintaining it and making sure that any little tweaks we wanted to add, we could add. But really, it's just like basically a JavaScript thing where you just You have some functions that you define as like standard things of like listen on the like, Alexa response received event or whatever, like if it's this thing, and you have to define some stuff in their interface where it's like, that's where you set up the examples of I'm forgetting all the terminology because it's been a year. But basically, like, long story short, once you learn a few kind of domain specific things, it's pretty much just writing JavaScript.
That's awesome.
Pretty easy.
That's a cool use of, I think, using the code in a marketing way that probably a lot of people aren't using right now. But from the way that trends look, voice activated commands like that in the house are only going to increase. And it's interesting too. Like, I've been thinking, I wonder if you think about this, but the way that, like, if you ask to search for something, with Google, you get 10 results. But if you're using the Echo, then you're only getting like usually just reads you like the one result as far as I've seen. So really ranking for that, as far as marketing goes, really ranking for that top result becomes 100% of the traffic. You may not even have a choice as far as I've seen so far. Did you guys think about that as far as how ranking might work and marketing Gimlet podcasts on that?
Yeah, we did. I mean, a huge part of it was like making sure we had a good relationship with Amazon. And that was one of the like sort of advantages of being a part of a company like Gimlet that's been able to build a brand already in a sort of separate space. And then we could take it to Amazon, and like we had enough credibility where they were like willing to chat with us, and we could like have people there that we talked to and stuff like that. We were able to work out some like good stuff around the launch of it to make it extremely frictionless. The thing was called Chompers. And so you basically say, Alexa, play Chompers. And you don't even have to have the app installed or anything like that. And it knows what to do, thanks to like our partnership with Amazon. And it plays this cool thing for kids that's basically like a toothbrush timer, except it tells you stories or sings songs and has jokes and all sorts of stuff. And so the basic problem it's solving is if you're a parent, it's very hard to get your kid to brush their teeth. And it's basically impossible to get your kid to brush their teeth for 2 minutes, which is how long they're supposed to. Like, dentists recommend it, and kids tend to get cavities and stuff if they don't. But, it's very boring for a kid to do that. So it's a big pain. And so basically we turned it into like a treat where it's like, in exchange for brushing your teeth, you get this like fun content. It was a pretty cool thing. And we partnered with Oral-B, who is like the main sponsor of it. And they just kind of like sponsored the overall thing. There wasn't like a lot of advertising or anything like that in it because it's a kids thing. But it won a Cannes Lion, so that was pretty cool. And I helped a lot with like basically figuring out how the product should work. The fun kind of like game mechanic type thing we put in was streaks. So at the end of it, it gives you like a reward telling you like, oh, that was one. Come again tomorrow to get 2 in a row. And we just keep kind of incrementing the counter basically.
I didn't know that you could write data to the Echo, the Alexa. Yeah, that's cool.
Oh yeah, you just have like, you can have a database. I mean, it's just kind of like a Node app, Express app basically, where it's like, you get something from Amazon that triggers like stuff to happen. But then what happens after that is like, you can have a database, you can have whatever.
That's super interesting. It's interesting too, like, cause you were head of product at Gimlet, and I wonder, how does this fit into the product? This Chompers, it sounds like an app, but how does that fit into what I know of Gimlet as just being really like a podcast creation and distribution content maker? Yeah.
Well, this is basically a podcast. It's a podcast designed for like Alexa, and I don't know if it's on Google Home yet or not, but that was like in the works basically when I was leaving. But basically, it's just a different form of a podcast where it's like a 2-minute thing that you activate through your Alexa that, we create. But the process of actually creating the content had a lot in common with the process of creating like a 40-minute episode.
So Nathan, now you've left Substack, and I'm curious, what's interesting to you now? What kinds of either projects or fields are you thinking for your next steps in your career?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of what I learned at HardBound, I think is still, I think there's a lot of potential value there. The thesis of HardBound was basically like, if you can create, really good content in a new format where you sort of integrate the content with the format to create a much better experience than what you can on just sort of like writing on the internet or having video or podcasts, that it could create a different and special enough thing that people would actually really like that. And a lot of people have done this. Like, I would argue Headspace and Calm are examples of this, where it could be a podcast, but instead they created an app. They've sort of built it into tracks. The way they structure the thing sort of integrates software and content in a way that solves a problem, which in their case is like learning meditation. There's it's funny, Sam Harris just launched one too for meditation called Waking Up. So it's like you can get pretty deep in it. And then the other thing I kind of learned with HardBound with Substack is like these sort of subscription content businesses can work really well. And you can keep costs pretty low, and you have a pretty defensible business, and it's a lot of fun to make if you're like creating that content. And so part of me is just really, I have no clue what I'm going to do next. I'm open to lots of different things, but part of me is interested in doing something like that. There's different parts of HardBound that I can imagine a version of that's like take everything I learned and then give it another go. Because we did even get it to the point where like if I were the only employee, we could have gotten pretty close to the point where it was paying my bills, but it was just really expensive and hard to create a lot of that content, and so it just wasn't feasible to do in the kind of bootstrapped model. But I think I can figure out another version of it that's like more bootstrappable.
Yeah, I mean, I think the examples you gave are really novel, really interesting, and that maybe are underappreciated as far as the success of Headspace, which is like, from what I understand, a pretty huge company now, as well as Calm. And if you look at the content that they make, I mean, I don't want to undercut it, but I mean, it's mostly audio, at least Calm, which is what I happen to have. And yeah, it's fairly that's fairly scalable. I guess that's maybe one of the things you're looking for in the next project that you work on, something that you can maybe less intensive time wise or money wise to grow.
Yeah, and like, to me, one thing that's interesting is nobody really knows at the outset of one of these things how big it should be. So like, it's in this weird space where it's like, maybe some of the more ambitious ideas, if they work really, really well, would be great candidates for venture funding. Like the Skim is a great example of this. I mean, it's an email newsletter, but like it's also a lot of other things now, and it's a huge business doing amazingly well. There's another one kind of similar called Shine. It's a text message that then they built an app, and they have, so you kind of, what you do is you anchor on one thing and then you reinvest and you sort of extend it. And, some of them might end up being just pretty good, like lifestyle businesses. Some of them may end up being really big, great venture capital investments. And the problem is, upfront, it's sort of hard to tell usually which is which. And it's not just for like subscription content businesses. It's also like lots of things, right? So another thing I'm sort of interested in is like, there's kind of like initially the way you would get funding for something is venture capital. And then that was kind of like thesis, right? So then antithesis was like stuff like Indy VC, or there's other examples of like specifically funding kind of like companies that aren't trying to be giant unicorns. They just want to build a real business, and it's going to be not necessarily that big. But I think it's kind of rough because you don't actually know what it's going to become. From the outset, you're not necessarily setting out to start something that's like giant or bust, or something that's small and intentionally not trying to be big, and you're just going to like, instead of ever reinvesting in the company, you're just purely going to squeeze all the profits into your own pocket. I think the more realistic approach is like, an entrepreneur up front knows that they want to do something. They think it has a really good chance of achieving some level of success. They have no clue how big that level of success could be. If there's lots of ways to reinvest into the business to make it grow more, they definitely want to do that. But also, they don't want to kill the company like over nothing just because it doesn't look like it's on path of becoming a unicorn. And so I think it'd be interesting to try and come up with some model of funding early stage stuff that's like helping people who aren't already rich quit their jobs, work on building things that seem like it's got an amazing chance of being at least a good business. And in that case, it could work out okay, and it could have more of an Indy VC type model of like taking dividends or something like that. But also, if it becomes bigger, it would work as like you have equity in the thing, and so you end up making returns that way if you want to.
I've never heard of this. What are you saying? Indy VC? What is that?
Oh, Indy VC, INDIE, Indy VC, and it's basically this guy, Bill something, I forget his name, but he used to work at O'Reilly Alpha Tech Ventures, I think. Anyway, he basically just, I don't want to, Bryce, that's his name. I don't want to put too many like words in his mouth because I don't fully know the like motivation, but from what I understand of it, it's basically like a model for funding companies that are real revenue generators and could use additional funding in order to grow, but don't want to do the venture capital model of like sell equity and you're trying to become this giant thing and you're willing to do kind of crazy stuff, long shot bets that probably won't work out and will kill the company if they don't work out, but if it does work, could make you like a unicorn. So the idea is like, instead of paying like just buying equity and getting paid whenever there's a liquidity event, like the company gets bought or IPOs, something like that, you almost more like a loan, invest in the company, and then they pay it back to you over time in the form of dividends. So I don't know exactly the legal financial structure, but it's basically a model that works for companies that aren't trying to like get bought or IPO or something like that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I have that with a lot of people who come to me and want to start to build something. And I think what most people don't understand about venture capital, which you hit on there, is that they tend to give you like a VC, you'll tell them your idea, I'll summarize it, you get money. And there's only two ways that the investor is going to make money is if it either IPOs, which means go to Wall Street and becomes huge, or you get acquired. There's really only those two ways, but there's not a way to just grow a company. Like very few people will just invest in you for dividends, or at least that's not the story. That's not like the I don't know. That's like not the Silicon Valley kind of story that, rags to riches that everybody's telling, whatever that is. But there's something really like pure and like nice about just like building something because people use it and because it's a viable business. And, I've definitely been at companies where they'll kill the thing. And I think that's what you're talking about. If you don't like, that's not enough. If you're not going to become huge, it's just like, why are you even trying? Which is like really self-defeating and annoying.
Yeah, I agree. And I, even like being at, Gimlet and General Assembly were both companies that raised a lot of money and it limited certain options. I don't think that they both had good exits and it was a good, outcome, I think, for everybody, including the investors. But they didn't really have the option of just like, growing as best they could, but not like killing themselves to like be giant or something like that, And so I think the other model of funding is like pretty good, but it also kind of presumes that you're not going to end up being really big because the way it funds it is like, it's sort of like, first of all, kind of the signal and the statement that it makes of taking funding from those sources. And then second of all, the actual legal and financial structure. So I think it'd be really interesting to start something where it's like, it's just unclear and just admitting it's unclear at the early stage if this is going to be a lifestyle business or a giant unicorn. And as a founder, you just want to build a real business that works and makes you happy and makes customers happy. And there's different ways that you could make money off of that. One way is being really profitable and issuing dividends. Another way is being giant and selling the company or IPOing or something like that. And you just in the earliest phases don't know. And I think you could engineer some form of investing vehicle to enable that for people. And I think that could be good. So I'm kind of interested in that too, although I've never invested in companies and I don't know, but it just seems like maybe there's a need for that. Cause the reason why I thought of it is cause that's actually what I would want right now cause what I want to do next, I have a specific idea of like what it would be, but I don't know how big it would be. I think it could be really big, but I don't want to lie to a VC and be like, oh, I'm definitely going to make it a really giant thing. I think there's an amazing chance of it being real. And a just maybe slimmed okay chance of it being giant. And it would be nice if there was a way to make money either way, where it's like, as long as it's kind of profitable, then that's good.
I love that third option. That's really cool. I mean, this isn't at all a solution, but the first thing that comes to mind is like maybe somewhere between Kickstarter and crypto, there's like a way that you can crowdsource the money and get people excited. I don't know. Just random thoughts, but yeah.
That is an interesting idea. Yeah. Totally. I don't know. I've got to think about it a lot more. I literally thought of that earlier today on a phone call with one of my former investors from HardBound, who I was talking about like what I would want to do next. And so that's a very fresh, unpolished thing. But yeah.
Awesome. Hey, I got two rapid fire questions just for the end that I usually ask people. What resources or websites do you use to stay up to date on technology?
Oh man. I don't really focus on staying up to date on technology. I know how to build basic things in like Rails and Node and React and Express, and like I'll use different things for different kind of purposes. For me, the default is probably Rails because it's just so fast and I know the basics of it so well that if I want to spin something up, that's probably the answer for me. And so I think about like what kind of like thing I'm trying to build. And then if there's like a thing where it's like, oh, I need to learn how to do this thing, probably using like Canvas. How do I do that or whatever? Then I'll Google like how to use it in Canvas, and there will be some stuff that's like new and I can use, and there will be some stuff that is old and I can use, and it doesn't really matter as much when it came out. I don't try and stay up to date on technology.
That's a great answer. And my final, I love it. And my final question is, are there any tools or hacks at the moment that really save you time, or you use every day, or you think are exciting?
I would say maybe my biggest time-saving hack is to not worry as much about, maybe it's also just because this is fresh in mind because of what I just said, but to not worry about like what is cool and what people are using. Like, Substack uses Node and Express and React, and I thought it was really powerful and nice, and React is pretty good, but God, it's just so much easier to use Rails. And like, I know it's not like as cool, but it's just so much easier. And so like, I'm working on a little thing for fun right now, and I just turned back to Rails because I know it's not as like, whatever, there's not as many like developer jobs in there, it's not as fast growing, but like, frankly, for what I need right now, I need to save myself time and to build this thing faster, and Rails lets me build it faster. So
I love it.
Going with that.
I think that's the best advice, because there's always this noise. There's always more that and trends. And I always tell my students when we talk about what digital literacy is, I think it's just knowing the right tool for the job. And there's a lot of noise out there, so you just gotta do it what you think is best. So.
And if the job is you want to be the kind of software engineer that is like on top of all the latest stuff in the JavaScript world, then like awesome, it's good for you to like learn the fine points between like Babel and Webpack and Gulp and Yelp or whatever, all the, you know what I mean, like all the different stuff. And like I just know that's not ever going to be my thing, and so I just don't worry about it. Yeah.
Hey Nathan, it's been so great having you on the show. Thanks for chatting today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's been awesome.
And is there any place that people can go to learn more about you that you would like to send them?
Twitter. I am NBASHAW. I need to update it to be my new last name.
Love
but
it.
It's hard to change the Twitter handle. That's a bigger risk change than just the name. So I'm getting there. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you for having me.
All right. I want to thank Nathan for coming on the show. And if you're listening and you want any of the links that we mentioned to podcasts, books, some of the companies we talked about, all of this, as well as the full transcript of every word we said, is available at onemonth.com. So just go to onemonth.com and click on the blog. While you're there, you can also sign up for the weekly newsletter where you'll get some updates and tidbits and some news from me every week. You can also take a class with me if you'd like to learn how to make websites, learn Python, Ruby, a lot of different skills. All of that is available at onemonth.com. If you have any questions for me about the show, about 1 month or anything, you can email. It's pretty easy. Just go to your email, like Gmail or whatever, and type in teachers@onemonth.com and say something, and I'll read that and I'll respond. So that's cool. All right. Well, this has been a lot of fun. And I hope you have a really great, wherever you are, rest of your week, rest of your day. How's it feeling? How's it feel to be alive? Pretty good, right? All right. Have a great day. Bye.